It starts with judgment, discernment, the ability to look at the world and discriminate light from darkness, health from sickness. As Davila well put it, hierarchies are celestial. In hell, all are equal. And this doesn't just apply to people, but to ideas, concepts, and everything else across the board. In a similar vein, we've all heard the saying, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. Resist the urge to cheapen this idea by picturing some anthropomorphized figure clad in red with horns and a pitchfork, and consider the devil here synonymous with darkness, disease, poison, or degenerative entropy. The philosophical conception of relativism attempted to rob us of our ability to discern light from dark, our ability to efficiently quantify, rank, and value the various elements and aspects of our reality. We've been told all things are equal, and that any perceived difference is essentially meaningless, only our very personal subjective judgment. And further, that this subjective judgment is intrinsically flawed, as it stems from an evil root, from an oppressive patriarchal race or culture that has attempted to harm or destroy everything in its path throughout history. When everything is deemed equal, the darkness becomes equivalent to the light. They tell us perhaps this darkness is just misunderstood, and if only we work to tolerate, or better yet embrace it, we'll cease being ignorant and, quote, judgmental. In nature, the lion, bold, powerful, courageous, announces its presence with a roar. And even in the hunt, though it does seek the element of surprise, rarely relies on subterfuge or slinks around in the shadows, but charges directly, relying on its superior speed and strength. The snake, on the other hand, slithers around on its belly, often blending itself into its environment, chameleon-like, to pretend it's not there, relying more on its cunning to find its opportunities. The intrusion of darkness into the world happens very much like this, like a creeping, slithering, predatory creature, always alert for any weaknesses to exploit to gain a foothold, attempting to go unnoticed as it quietly gains a superior position from which to strike, injecting poison into its prey to paralyze, restrain, bind, to then consume it and transmute their energy into its own. And I see this forced cultural imposition, this subversion of nations and cultures in order to monopolize and completely reshape their manner of thinking and being, as equivalent to an intrusion of darkness. It's such a dark cloud, in fact, that it may well lead to the collapse of the nations it's infected. And to be blunt, I'm increasingly convinced that devoting energy to preventing this collapse is a mistake. Our political system is now essentially beyond repair. Conservatism has become progressivism driving the speed limit. Its job, over the past several decades, seems to be to lose ground approximately half as quickly as the progressive element might like them to. And these forces seeking to remake the world have made such progress towards their goals that there really is virtually no existing government or political party or supremely powerful institution that is worth preserving. Picture a home in which termites have eaten away at the foundation and so destroyed the supporting beams that the entire edifice is on the brink of collapse, and no longer the least bit beautiful, but a mere shell and echo of what it once was. At what point does a builder cease attempting to replace every affected plank and beam, or put forth effort into constructing supports, patches, and endless minor fixes, and instead choose to use his efforts and materials in the creation of something new, incorporating the knowledge and lessons learned and moving forward? What I'll be speaking to here isn't so much the creation of a new physical nation or community, as I did in the previous Call for Revolutionaries video, but the creation of something less tangible, but certainly no less important, capable of acting as the foundation and bedrock of any real-life community. I'll be speaking to the creation and cultivation of a new culture. And new here is something of a misnomer, because, in my opinion, the best new culture would be the best old culture, if this makes sense. Because with regard to specifics and minutiae in the manifestation of cultures, there is always newness everywhere. But with regard to essences and foundational elements, there truly is nothing new under the sun. The ideal would be the best and most timeless wisdom and truths of prior ages, ported and morphed into new clothes, old wine in new skins. Culture is to a nation or society or community much like schooling is to a student, in that it's the formative and informative air we breathe that serves to shape and orient us. Being immersed in putrid and polluted air inevitably makes us sick and weak and exhausted. And because mind, body, and soul adapt so efficiently to their surroundings, think of an athlete training for several hours each day for a specific sport and how their body reshapes itself accordingly. Consider then the implications for mind, body, and soul of this path we're currently stumbling down. It's literally destroying us, inside and out. To give one example to illustrate the point, think of Americans becoming fatter, softer, more sensitive and fragile as we've shifted to devoting the bulk of our hours to sedentary behavior. And our bodies, that naturally crave fresh berries or wild game, are now offered up fruit-shaped candy or Impossible Burger monstrosities in its place. And of course this extends well beyond food and diet, which I mention by way of analogy to illustrate the larger point. Our innate craving for genuineness and sincerity, or real human connection, or a higher purpose and direction, is met with actors and actresses, virtual environments and superficial connections online, or the subtly pushed conception that our role in life is our 9-to-5 job, or to be a consumer. Nearly everyone on both sides of the ideological aisle, including those like Jordan Peterson and the intellectual dark web crowd, who purport to have the tools necessary to help us escape this chaos, still cite measures like our economy or GDP or per capita income as the cleanest measures for success or achievement on a national level, as if this was the ideal path forward, as if it might be a lack of money that's plaguing us as human beings. I think we're starting to recognize just how mistaken this notion is, and how this root error has resulted in so many compounding errors piled atop it. This period of time represents the most intriguing opportunity, and it's one we simply have to take advantage of. As our current masters of entertainment and popular culture, representing a swiftly and justifiably dying world, push a mentality of weakness and domestication on their captive populations, unlimited tolerance of nearly all negative behaviors and mindsets and inclinations, and the unspoken conception of a new caste system, with themselves in the leading roles. An increasing number of people across the world are recognizing this for what it is, as an inorganic power play, meant to everywhere unseat opponents and claim throne and scepter. This battle is far from new, and although it's massively escalated post-World War II, its roots stretch back through the French Revolution and well beyond. And its foremost orchestrators are of a human type similar to those Byzantine eunuchs or masters of court intrigue, a type wholly unskilled in personal courage, and wholly lacking that brand of innate charisma or gravitas that naturally moves populations in this direction or that, but makes up this deficit with a mastery of poisons, physical and otherwise, and deceit and manipulation. But it's a mistake to think these major revolutions and cultural shifts happen first and foremost due to political machinations, or even organized street-level actions. These are the outgrowths, effects of an underlying cause. They are the resulting fruits of seeds planted. A BLM or Antifa, or pivotal events like the George Floyd happening and the resulting trial, are cultural byproducts and outgrowths. It's the Soroses, or Zuckers, or Zuckerbergs, and their countless institutions and media networks. It's their dutiful puppets, the Rachel Maddows or Jimmy Kimmels or Stephen Colberts, that cultivate the ground for the flowering of such poisonous weeds. And it's in their pushing of the Overton window through the effective usage of manipulative propaganda that they're provided with the oxygen they need to thrive. In other words, it's a culture that's being created here. It's no exaggeration to say that there are now billions of dollars fueling thousands of writers, directors, producers, and corporate media executives, all devoting the bulk of their attention toward changing the way we've traditionally seen the world, to rewrite history where possible, and where not possible, to ignore it entirely, or even proactively work to bury it, and to replace inherited ideas and wisdom with brand new reality interpretation frameworks of their own creation. The philosophical architects of this modernity being shoved down the throats of so much of the world are largely from the Frankfurt School mold, and their ideas and modes of thinking are entirely ahistorical. They are unable to pull from history or use it as guidance or model in any way, for the simple reason that all of history stands in contrast and as an open rebuke to such men and their ideas. They're essentially forced to toss out all historical context. History, to them, is to only be trotted out to be whipped, mocked, and held up as something oppressive and unenlightened. If you've ever wondered why we have so few movies dealing with great men or events from history, and so many Marvel movies, this is your answer. When they toss aside or make an enemy of all of history, they toss out truth and reality, the two opponents they seem to most despise. And in its stead, they craft and distribute their own Frankenstein replacement, the amateurishly pieced together products of spiritually embittered, envious, fevered, and unhealthy minds. And by tossing aside actual history, replacing it all with products of their own subjective speculations and imaginations, they're serving to rewrite the very fabric of reality, of that significant portion of the population that dutifully spends several hours every day, on average, immersed in their creative products. After all, historical truth only exists in our minds insofar as it's allowed to be spoken. If it were possible to completely prevent its honest airing, to sever a people from its past, from its roots, it's then possible to fill that void with anything. And of course, the storylines and narratives and themes these subversives would choose, even if not consciously or conspiratorially, would be those that paint their type in the best light, and their opponents in the worst. And it's not just creative products like Netflix shows or movies that act as a vehicle to spread this new culture. That breed of bot men made into celebrities through such vehicles are used just as efficiently as influencers and advertisements. Almost without exception, every major celebrity knows full well that their continued celebrity status heavily depends on their being a mouthpiece for the tenets and ideas of this new culture. When 9 out of 10 celebrities and influencers and individuals in the public eye, and of course this figure is extremely conservative, seem to have the same politics, the same stances on nearly every major hot-button issue, despite the rest of the nation being divided down the middle, it's safe to say a remarkable success has been achieved. This was a conscious monopolization, if we're to believe their writings. They knew the best way to control the public was by controlling the small handful of tastemakers and trendsetters, and better still, to control the levers and machinations that determines who becomes a tastemaker and trendsetter. In other words, don't leave the process up to chance, or let it be in any way natural or organic, according to unmanipulated public sentiment. but rather make an art form out of creating credentialing organizations with fancy titles or awards shows and institutions. To put it succinctly, I believe our modern culture is completely unnatural and has been shaped into a utilitarian tool with the aim of helping to manipulate and mold public perception and their very manner of thinking and processing the world. Having said that, though we seem to be in a tricky position, it's certainly not all doom and gloom. Not in the least. One would have to be blind to not recognize just how impotent celebrity figures now are in most of their overt attempts to influence. The public seems increasingly aware of the game being played, to such an extent that these manipulative efforts often directly backfire. To give one example, consider those painfully awkward music videos over the past few years, using a variety of celebrity figures to push masks, vaccines, Trump impeachment, Black Lives Matter, or similar causes. Every sign points to the fact that an old world is finally in its death throes as we speak, that nothing will be the same over the coming decades. In both positive and negative ways, the world as we've known it for so long is officially ceasing to be, and in some sense, never really was. But instead, so much that we thought we knew turned out to be mere artifice, delusion, and stagecraft. I can't stress enough the importance of the recognition of this fact. Our debt and fiat currency-based economy stands on the verge of collapse. Our modern conception of currency itself is being turned into something of a joke with the advent of cryptocurrencies and meme coins like Doge. The concept of the, quote, American dream is now a laughable relic of the past to nearly anyone under 50 years old. And with it, the idea of spending the bulk of our hours working some uninspiring 9-to-5 is being seriously reevaluated. The noble reasoning for slaving away in such roles for the bulk of our prime years, that conception that we're, quote, providing for our family, or, quote, ensuring a better future for our children, is also being reevaluated, and with good reason. Schooling, especially college and university, made up a bulk of parents' expenses. And what is schooling exactly as it stands? Is it not paying nearly the equivalent of the average American's yearly salary to have your child deeply indoctrinated and programmed by some of the least impressive and healthy people in the world, or allowing them to take out massive loans to do so, which then hang over their heads and force them to become indentured servants to this same incestuous control structure for several years, in exchange for any hope of simply breaking even again? And even if our teachers' unions, our professors, and academia at large weren't completely monopolized by our worst, with the intent of churning out carbon copies of themselves, even if we set education aside entirely, is money really still the best path toward cultivating a well-oriented, bright, and healthy child? I say this all to make the larger point that a culture, a way of life, a worldview, is dying, a well-deserved death. One could argue it started with the best intentions, and that it had a good run for a stretch. But like anything of value, when we lower our standards and raise our tolerance level, darkness inevitably slips through the cracks, unseats the creators of said value, and takes the reins. And it's important to recognize this new culture still has its champions and promoters, and even more important to recognize that it will continue to, because its propagation is backed by many of the most powerful people in the world, and a practically unlimited flow of money. It'll flex and adapt and always find its most attractive face to present to the public, as its visible facade, as advertising billboard. And it'll always, until the bitter end, have its willing and dutiful players, epitomized by those types for whom money or social credit is the foremost priority in life. The type that doesn't care to think too deeply or look too closely, but instead speaks and acts at every turn in the manner which most immediately benefits them. And it's for this reason that I don't think an ideal use of time and energy is to play this game of whack-a-mole and battle this multi-headed hydra or swat at these branches while the root quietly grows countless more. In other words, I don't believe our ideal role is to be reactionaries, forever pointing out where they've gone wrong, forever on the defense. This can't help but become a spiritually and psychologically exhausting battle of attrition on the enemy's terms. It also represents a belief that the present state of things might be somehow repaired with a few simple patches or tweaks or refinements here and there. That ship has sailed. There is no political or economic policy capable of reversing the spiritual rot that has taken such deep root across much of the nation, specifically amongst our current power brokers. And there's no healing the rift and fracture that now exists between groups of people with nearly polar opposite mindsets, virtues, and ethics. Nor should there be any attempt to heal this rift by finding middle ground, in my opinion. Because even this wording is a bit misleading. It would never be a, quote, healing, so much as forcing both sides to make such extreme compromises that they'd have to live lives completely contrary to their own preferences and ideals. A lose-lose situation that benefits nobody, except that shrewd parasitic element who seek to keep the productive working class under their control, to avoid the entire edifice collapsing in on itself. No, reactionary defense is not the ideal here. The ideal path forward is something much more beautiful, exciting, and endlessly intriguing. An opportunity few generations find themselves blessed with. The ideal path forward is to artfully, carefully, prudently begin to create our own cultural framework. One might even say recreate or rediscover. And I'm going to try my best to explain exactly what I mean by this. Consider the concept of a flag. Superficially, it's simply a piece of cloth, containing some colors, designs, or patterns. And yet, it becomes so much more than this over time. It becomes charged with significance and meaning, according to the history and deeds and characteristics of the nation or people it represents. When healthy or strong nations are in their heyday, it becomes a point of pride, something to rally around and behind, something anyone might point to and, by indicating their allegiance, communicate a great deal about themselves and their orientation and beliefs. This creates unity, cohesiveness, and a sense of community, and there is immense power in this. You'll notice as this kakistocracy of international finance destroys the Western world, the flags of these nations are casualties along the way. Some are hidden and destroyed, others mocked and defamed or treated with embarrassment, and as our nations further degrade, we're liable to feel our own type of embarrassment towards our flag. Meanwhile, new flags representing new cultures spring up all around us. And insofar as they represent the preferred doctrine of the parasite class, they're brand managed into prominence, becoming adored by the oblivious NPC population. America now flies a flag exclusively representing our homosexual population at the UN and in embassies across the world. And I use the flag only as an analogy here, a visible symbol that represents an essence or archetype, the collective traits and characteristics and ideas and mindsets of those who wave it and identify with it. It represents a culture. There's nothing this subversive ruling class fears more than the prospect of a new culture, in bold and confident opposition to that which they are pushing. And it needs to be fully recognized and understood at the outset that the moment such a culture gains ground, it'll be their leading target. This fear is the reason we have controlled opposition figures, seeking to splinter and fracture and stoke infighting, and find clever and covert ways to subtly champion poisonous ideas and personalities, and confuse and muddy the waters. It's the reason corporate and social media go out of their way to silence those individuals they fear might make headway here, and spend so much time, money, and attention crafting hit pieces to mischaracterize such individuals and their ideas. It's the reason I'm making this video and encouraging all listening to proudly and boldly take up this fight in any and every way they might be able. And it really is a fight we can all play some role in. In a sense, it's a fight we do play a role in every moment of our lives, whether we like it or recognize it or not. Every person is essentially an ambassador for all that they are, in a very real sense. Their gender, their race or nationality, their political ideology, their families, everything they value, like, or embrace. Whether we choose to take the role seriously or not, we are forced to play it. Those celebrities and influential figures you see dutifully parroting the political or ideological cause du jour, whether it be vaccine promotion, pushing climate change fear, or marketing the idea that the white race and whiteness is so inherently evil that it's our duty to not rest until both are destroyed. These are the ambassadors for the hidden hand behind the curtain, equivalent to attractive billboards, using said attractiveness to market a truly horrible, poisonous product. For us, this dynamic is essentially reversed. Because we have so little control over the public square and things like the corporate press and social media platforms, not only do we not have the benefit of research and focus groups and unlimited monies to design the most manipulatively convincing billboards possible, but in most cases, we don't even get to decide who or what appears on said billboard as visible representation of our ideas. And instead, the worst possible representative image is chosen for us, with the obvious goal of driving people away. So, it's a bit like, in contrast to their attractive advertisements concealing pure poison, we have unattractive billboards, and yet a brilliant, beautiful product. In other words, our truth, our fundamental ideas and concepts about the way the world works and should be structured, have proven themselves throughout history in every possible way. They're timeless, objective truths, the embrace and implementation of which has the power to set things right with the world and help eliminate chaos and confusion. A key aspect of this culture creation is communicating these truths and putting our own best foot forward in presenting an attractive image that disarms and nullifies what will be an endless barrage of negative propaganda, increasing in fervor over the coming years. If culture might be seen as a house or home, consider that it doesn't matter how beautiful and comfortable and well-structured and edifying the interior might be. If those in control of the framing of the place are able to manipulate and distort how the public sees it, causing a significant portion of those that might otherwise be allies to simply walk on past, and even feel justified in doing so. And of course, the opposite is equally true. Such effective manipulative framing could even make that witch's home in Hansel and Gretel look like paradise. There's a quote by the author Johann Goethe that's always struck me as one of the most profound and important and informative for those seeking to understand why the world is in the state it's in at present. Because innately trustworthy people are more naturally trusting of others, and thus more naive, the vast majority of people harbor this notion that virtually all peoples and cultures are the same in the sense that we're all seeking to improve the world, to make things better, healthier, happier, more efficient, and more just. What if it were the case that certain subsets of humanity weren't seeking to improve things, but rather were exclusively seeking power? To achieve this goal, they might be willing to don whatever mask might be most helpful in furthering their progress. But strip away the masks, and the root motive is shown to be an insatiable lust for gain, regardless of the cost to others. Perhaps even reveling in the costs to others, believing that everything that causes harm to an outgroup is a victory for their in-group. To those that haven't yet considered this possibility as the motive or driving force of those currently holding the reins of power, I hope you might begin to give it some serious consideration. Our very future hinges upon a more noble sort of human being, finding the means to unseat his corrupt, subversive, parasitic, and deceitful counterpart. And this requires our learning to create attractive billboards, to return to that useful analogy, in order to help draw the world back to sanity. And let me be clear about what I mean here. I'm certainly not suggesting a shift to style over substance. And I'm also not suggesting that we should aim to develop such a culture exclusively as an attractive draw for the benefit of those on the outside looking in. It's even more important for those on the inside looking out, seeking to further understand who and what they are, what they represent, and how this compares and contrasts with the world at large. As opponents push the monstrosities of modern art and architecture on us, our own flag should instead represent the timeless conceptions of beauty, created by those artists of inspired genius who understood the significance of things like balance, harmony, and wholeness, the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, and that multitude of similar cues from nature that teach us what objective aesthetic beauty is. Similarly, as they push monstrous human forms across every facet of media, the unhealthy and obese, the doughy soy boy new male, the sneering, pierced and tattooed individual with their tongue out and middle finger in the air, it's our role to everywhere push the opposite and champion and appreciate the healthy and well-proportioned and radiant. What we value matters immensely, and it's crucial to fully understand this. The concepts of judgment, discernment, and values and valuations are practically synonymous. It's the process of engaging in that daunting but necessary task of saying, I believe X is a better path forward than Y, or this is healthier than that, or this is more beautiful than that. Merely through the act of formulating and communicating opinions and preferences, we create powerful ripple effects that help shape the world. And these ripple effects become ever more powerful according to how seriously you care to treat the role. The more we can be conscious and thoughtful and willful in our approach in this regard, the more quickly and effectively and robustly a new culture is then able to slowly but surely take shape. Paying attention to your tastes and preferences and inputs, to what you embrace and what you choose to reject, to how you're shaping yourself and how you're helping to shape others, to how you communicate and what you communicate, what you voice approval or disapproval of. And I'd like to clarify, I'm not suggesting such conscious efforts might help bring the entire world swiftly into good order. I've spoken before about that all-important conception of epistemological polarity, and the idea that a fork in the road is sending polar opposite factions down very different paths. This isn't about salvaging that element sprinting in the opposite direction. Many of these have essentially gone past the point of no return. The programming is now so deep that, for many, it likely can't be undone. Have you noticed how prevalent the themes of glorifying monsters has become? Monsters, zombies, vampires, the dark and demonic, the satanic, the nihilistic and hopeless, the ugly and malformed, the angry and envious and confused and chaotic, the shameless and brazen and ignoble, drag queens now openly targeting children. It's all cut from the same cloth, and it's their emerging culture. They're quite literally creating hell on earth, and an increasing number of them seem to consciously recognize and embrace this. Attempting to reach those that have strayed the furthest down this path is a fool's errand and a lost cause, and a tremendous waste of time and energy at this late hour. If our act of planting a flag on the opposite end of the spectrum helps reach some of those who still have ears to hear, this is ideal. But what I'm referring to here is largely for our own benefit. In other words, even those within a group need billboards or reminders of who and what we are, who we've been, who we should be, and who we're capable of being. And this should be our focus. The further you're able to pull back and view things from a broader perspective, the more this becomes an exciting prospect and opportunity. The culture we're just now beginning to consciously formulate may well play the defining role in the shaping and molding of future generations. Their perspectives and orientations and worldviews, where their time and energy and attention is channeled. We may well be the generation with the opportunity to finally recognize and remove this poisonous IV drip, and to emerge from this madhouse, and once again become authors of our own destiny. Culture creators, those who most effectively craft ideas and conceptions, our philosophers and thinkers, these are the forces that truly move and shape our world. Compared to them, politicians and corporate leaders are merely an administrative class, uncreative errand boys, capable only of carrying out orders and acting according to their programming. We've ceded this ground to the opposition. Or, perhaps more accurately, we sat back passively and unaware as this territory was covertly conquered, subverted, and stolen out from under our feet. A small handful of men, filled with an envious malice and hatred toward the Western world and its people, have become its foremost influencers, programmers, and propagandists. If you ever wondered how a nation could plummet so swiftly from a relatively confident, self-assured, purposeful, and happy existence to one of confusion and self-loathing and a weakness totally devoid of masculine virtue and courage, this is the explanation. And it's important to recognize this is their heyday, their peak and high point. It can't get any better for them. It's a bit like that point in the roller coaster ride in which one hears the tick, tick, tick as it struggles to its highest point just before the plunge. And the reason this plunge is so inevitable is because none of this was built to last. It briefly unified several disparate groups, already beginning to turn on each other and tear one another to pieces. In no way was it constructed on sturdy and robust foundations. It was meant only to act as a weapon, meant to destroy, to disempower a hated foe, and everywhere empower their opposites, even if those opposites then devolve into chaotic friction and infighting. Because to return to that all-important Goethe quote, such men can't slither into power where health and order prevail. They need to inject poison. Yet poison isn't the basis for any new creation or growth. One can already see hints of what's to come, as various groups begin to spar more aggressively and vocally as they jockey for position atop the oppression totem pole. When a life philosophy is constructed around finding reasons to take offense and being aggressive and confrontational until the offender is rendered powerless, it's a recipe for a type of chaos we've not seen in our lifetimes. An exceptional type of chaos I think we'll all be forced to witness firsthand in the coming years. The most selfish, unhealthy, unproductive behaviors and modes of thinking have been drummed into these people. Because they saw, quote, whiteness as everything wrong with the world, they decided to invert the virtues and ethics and philosophical foundations of white peoples across the span of history. A sense of personal responsibility, magnanimity, justice, and fair play, extolling self-discipline, merit, and achievement, seeking to create healthy families with strong masculine and feminine male and female role models as guide. All of this and so much more flipped on its head. In other words, to the extent that Western mankind hit upon the correct solutions to life's biggest questions, this subversive element will to an equal degree embrace the polar opposite, incorrect answers to such questions. This is why I speak to the opening of Pandora's box. Most still don't realize the magnitude of what's been done here and what the ramifications will soon be, as years of sowing bad seed begins to produce its real fruits, with so much more to soon follow. The media, and that variety of outlets and platforms designed to shape and program the public, won't touch any of the obviously negative aspects of this degeneration and societal degradation as it unfolds, and will continue to use every bit of its time and money and talent to put the best foot forward with regard to optics, to paint the best possible picture, even as crime rates and homelessness and drug use everywhere skyrocket, standards and competency plummet, and civilization enters freefall. And for those who still watch their channels or read their articles and take them seriously, this storyline will be something of a modulating force, convincing them that perhaps the hell on earth they see personally everywhere around them isn't actually the norm everywhere else. But this manipulation, this surface-level layer of bread and circuses intended to cloak a descent into hell, can only go so far and accomplish so much. So, with regard to the cycles of history, this point in time represents their high water point, the ultimate flowering of poisonous culture. Our goal, our necessity, is to craft the alternative, to both create and recreate a cultural framework that maximizes health and human potential, the growth of mind, body, and spirit. Our task should be to manifest and display to the world our own high point. This certainly doesn't happen overnight, especially when a people has been so thoroughly deracinated, confused, and tied in knots. Nor should it happen overnight. It's far too important that it's done properly, as opposed to quickly. In no small part because mistakes here, just as similar mistakes in the creation or cultivation of political or economic systems, will lead to these same problems recurring, perhaps even dooming future generations to experience similar collapse and be forced to fight this same fight. I'd like to share my thoughts on what I feel might be some cornerstones of a healthier culture. Firstly, the development of new judgment and valuation metrics. A recognition that being a, quote, lover of science or holding a university degree is no longer a sign of being an intelligent or rational human being. That financial success is no longer an indicator of merit or ability, and that nearly all modern awards and credentials and badges are similarly polluted as they become partisan and ideological and weaponized. A healthy culture would seek a return to fundamentals, judging a person not upon their clothing in the broadest sense of that word, but based upon their character, their objective and genuine achievements or skill sets, their track record of being correct or incorrect, accurate or inaccurate, their sincerity and honesty and genuineness and general orientation, a recognition that all the external trappings in the world aren't worth a thing relative to inward development, coupled with a conscious effort to ignore the former and more highly value the latter. Secondly, a conscious attempt to reclaim our language and to speak with clarity and precision. A recognition that this invasive culture has attempted to prevent us from using certain helpful terms while attempting to force us to use new language of their own recent creation, while twisting and perverting other words and terms in an attempt to get a leg up in their battle with truth. A recognition that the healthiest and most robust cultures throughout our history have attempted to err on the side of Spartan and laconic speech, clean, clear, simple, powerful, and straightforward, as opposed to the flowery, ornate, overly complex word salads men tend to use when they're trying to convince others to reject the obvious. A return to a language of essences, one that recognizes the forest instead of getting lost in the trees, and thus naturally disarms the liar and deceiver. The more simple an idea, or a thought, or a sentence, or a person is, the more truthful they're forced to be. It's in verbose elaboration and complexity that deceit can hide or justify itself. Next, a recognition of the value of hardness and masculine virtue, and a recognition that when and where this is lacking, nations inevitably backslide into chaos, turning into weak, hedonistic, disoriented cesspools, and that masculinity has nothing to do with drinking beer or watching football or chasing easy women, or any of the other nonsensical caricatures modernity attempts to create, arising out of their total lack and thus total misunderstanding of the concept. Courage, strength, a mandate to understand our world to determine what to take up arms for or against accordingly. These and similar outgrowths of true masculinity are of the utmost importance across all eras and situational conditions, and only parasites or slavers seek to cultivate the opposites of these traits and tendencies. An embrace of masculine empathy, the idea that genuine and sober kindness and empathy naturally has a hard edge. Because when one truly wants what's best for a person, or a nation, or the world in general, they don't allow themselves to become a pushover and an enabler of negative thoughts or behaviors. It's the selfish parent that gives a child everything they want, the selfish friend that tells another only what they want to hear, or the selfish and short-sighted citizen cheering open borders because willfully blind to the devastating costs. This isn't kindness or empathy. It's simply weakness masquerading as something else, and in the longer term, it has an incredibly high cost. Much like the parable of giving a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, or teaching a man to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime, true, genuine empathy seeks to fundamentally, not superficially, solve problems in a prudent, far-sighted, all things considered type of manner. A recognition that aesthetics matter immensely, that visual representations and reminders of beauty and order help us further beautify and order ourselves internally and keep us well-oriented, allowing us to better recognize and manifest the beautiful in our own lives, refine our judgments in these regards, and thus move towards the light. A rejection of the hopeless, the eternally pessimistic, those dark clouds incapable of recognizing that they're actively spreading darkness by being consistently demoralizing and draining, and focusing solely on the negative in the world without ever recognizing or pointing to a way out. Such personality types, to the extent that they become influential, help create the worst possible self-fulfilling prophecies, because we all naturally move toward our dominant thoughts and orient ourselves according to our expectations. There are always paths forward. An inability to recognize or embrace them represents a personal failing, a lack of creativity and artistry and imagination and courage, not objective reality. An embrace and conscious cultivation of something similar to Nietzsche's Blonde Beast or Laughing Lions. Men capable of framing life as a profound and beautiful sporting contest and challenge, freeing themselves from those pathologies and that neuroticism so deeply drummed into our psychology by subversive elements. Strength coupled with finesse and nobility of spirit, a magnanimous nature and strong sense of fair play and justice. A recognition that justice is, and must be, a central pillar around which any healthy nation is created and revolves, and that this justice, in the highest and broadest and purest sense of that word, is what leads to the structure and order from which all else of value might then emerge. A rejection of the idiotic, modern, rebel without a cause, and I just don't give a f mentality that seeks to so infect upcoming generations, dissipating their energy in useless and pointless directions, turning life into a lazy, unthinking, undisciplined, and self-interested chaos. A recognition that not having any firm beliefs, goals, ideals, or orientation is the lifestyle of a petulant and immature clown, not a healthy man, an attitude that stands as the clearest proof and badge of spiritual inferiority. A mocking rejection of the celebrity idols and unhealthy sensitivities and sacred cows of our sickly modern world. Not a classless or overly aggressive attack, but rather a dispassionate, laughing rejection of poisonous idiocy as poisonous idiocy, fueled by a conscious recognition of where such false idols inevitably lead us if adopted. A recognition of the validity of the Dunning-Kruger effect at the broadest level, that the most brilliant and capable men tended to agree with Socrates and see everywhere just how much remained to be discovered, grasped, understood, and clarified, whereas our own, quote, intellectuals tend to be absurdly pretentious, middling intellects who've somehow convinced themselves not just that they have the world figured out, but often that they know better than nature itself. Delusions that grant them the audacity to invent artificial and unnatural systems and structures and frameworks of thinking and being that have negative ramifications beyond their understanding. And closely related to this, an understanding that many of our best and brightest shun power and influence due to this same strain of wisdom or modesty, while the most brazen and shameless and delusionally self-assured rush forward and seek power and influence in every sphere. And that our goal, just as it has been in the past and as it will be in the future, is to create mechanisms to bar the way and prevent the ascension of this type. A recognition that, while being driven to accomplish lofty aims that go beyond immediate personal gain, mere ambition, by contrast, isn't the net positive the modern world tells us it is. That the best man is he who seeks to gift power and influence to the most deserving, even where, in fact especially where, this isn't him. And that the worst man is he who seeks power and influence everywhere, always, regardless of whether he deserves it or his ability to effectively wield it. A simple man who knows his ideal place and plays his role to the best of his ability accordingly is vastly more respectable than one who constantly and everywhere seeks unwarranted promotion. A recognition that just as the worth of an individual isn't best measured by his wealth, the health and value of a nation isn't best measured by its economy, and the purely economic yardstick we use for judgment is the product of a foreign culture and should be rejected in favor of more meaningful measures. A rejection of that cult of efficiency and productivity that fails to ask the all-important question at the outset, for what, or to what end? And a recognition that defining proper goals and ideals is vastly more important than the speed of our progress in attaining them, and that efficient progress down an unhealthy path is a net negative, not a net positive, and that an economic structure is only truly healthy when it rewards those people and actions that most fundamentally improve, refine, beautify, or strengthen. A rejection of unnecessary complexity, and a recognition that simplicity is, as Whitman put it, the glory of expression and the purest form of communication, and that it everywhere acts as something of an immune system, protecting against deception and manipulation. A recognition that physical health and fitness is important, and helps lead to a healthy mind and spirit, and an embrace of sport and friendly competition of the type that improves and refines, and an embrace of the sporting mindset, broadly speaking, by way of powerful analogy. An athlete hardens and strengthens himself through play and genuinely enjoyable activity, a reminder that it's not merely suffering or endurance or trials and obstacles that have the potential to better us as human beings. Related to this, A realization that play itself has an incredibly meaningful place and role to play, and that we're not meant to simply be pack mules and bear burdens, and that in order to play the role of that atlas with the world on its shoulders, the healthiest forms of play aren't only capable of refreshing and revitalizing and cheering us, but serve to shape and train us in all important ways, and a recognition that we'd be well served to structure and orient our forms of play accordingly. A recognition that an optimally healthy national or racial or cultural body is just that, a body, and that its members all have different roles to play, unique strengths to contribute. Some might be physically gifted, others gifted with wisdom or brilliant minds, others an indomitable spirit or work ethic, others with a more mature spiritual nature, possessing a clean lens to allow God's light to shine through. All have vital roles to play, and our goal should be to create modes of living that allow each to discover and walk their destined ideal path in a manner that yields maximum benefit to themselves and others. A recognition that the healthy family is of absolutely central importance, and both cause and effect of any healthy and happy nation or society, and that a nation is meant to be, in ideal circumstances, seen as an extended family. A re-establishment of some form of the rites of passage we've historically always had, helping to manage that all-important transition of youth to adult in the most effective manner. As Keats said, the imagination of a boy is healthy, and the mature imagination of a man is healthy. But there is a space of life in between in which the soul is in a ferment, the character undecided, the way of life uncertain, the ambition thick-sighted. We need to once again understand just how important and formative this stage of life is, and instead of leaving it up to chance, act accordingly. A recognition that concepts like technology, or drug use, or violence and the use of force aren't purely negative in a black and white sense, but rather that the spirit in which they're pursued is all important. In less than ideal conditions, such concepts or activities can't help but act as fuel to the fire, as poorly oriented human beings make use of tools they don't fully understand, often for all the wrong reasons, and in the wrong spirit towards superficial ends, but that we should resist the temptation to write them off completely, failing to understand their potential positive utility. With a sober, wise, prudent guiding hand at the helm, as opposed to profiteering scoundrels, we might well find there are positive or necessary applications to these and other controversial pursuits, and that these are arenas that demand much more thought and discussion and profound consideration in the future. A conscious realization that while we may look fondly back to elements of the Scythian or Gothic, or the high points of Greek and Roman cultures, or aspects of 18th century Europe, or 1950s America, this doesn't mean we need to mount horses, build castles, or seek out big Buicks and dutiful aproned housewives, but rather that it was the guiding principles and fundamental ethos and manners of thinking and being of these peoples that are admired, and worthy of emulation, and that these might act as a starting point as we envision the future. In other words, a recognition that it wasn't the outward trappings, but the inward orientation that made these peoples and these eras what they were, and that these are the fires that need to be rediscovered and stoked once again. A rejection of those thought paths that seek to paint race or culture as of no importance. Those who've embraced a dishonestly manipulative view of history that equates any desire for cohesiveness and unity with potential genocide and hatred of the other. A simple recognition that any commonality, likeness, or shared trait among people allows them to naturally feel a deeper bond, a far more real and profound connection and resonance, and that this type of unity can be something wholly positive, magical, and create the best possible conditions for a community or nation to thrive and find true happiness and contentment. A complete rejection of all those who would seek to forcibly impose their culture or way of thinking on others, epitomized by those sickly and corrupt international finance and globalist mindsets, seeking to throw a net over all the earth and force all people to march to the beat of their single drum. And a belief that any attempt to forcibly indoctrinate our children into embracing this foreign culture might justly be opposed by any means necessary, with the moral high ground squarely on our side. And opposing mandatory indoctrination of our youngest and most impressionable is a cause worthy to fight and, if necessary, die for. A rejection of the false god of modern science, coupled with a recognition that it's the furthest thing from a completely objective, clinical, detached, and infallible pursuit, but rather that it bends and sways in the winds of prevailing culture. That we shape our science more than our science shapes and informs us, and that it's now largely been co-opted by this opposition culture that has all but completely monopolized academia and controls the purse strings when it comes to nearly all scientific grants and research monies. A recognition that science, in its highest and purest form, is the best method we have to answer a multitude of the most pressing questions, but that modern science is anything but this, and has degenerated into a mockery and parody of itself, broadly speaking. A re-embrace of sincerity and genuineness, and a rejection of that purely critical and cynical approach to life that everywhere seeks to mock, deride, and elevate a nihilistic sarcasm and irony, and not in a light-hearted, healthy manner, but one of purely negative gravity. That world of deeply unhappy people, so filled with darkness that they seem to believe any happiness or lightness or genuine feeling is a result of misunderstanding or lack of education. A mentality as poisonous and pretentious as it is inaccurate and fundamentally flawed. An embrace of magnanimity, nobility of spirit, rejecting envy and everywhere giving credit where due. Recognizing that those who refuse to do this only hurt themselves, as they both underestimate and fail to fully understand the other, and even signal an unwillingness to understand, and a lack of honesty and truthfulness in their perspective. Giving as much credit to an opposition idea as is possible and justifiable, and then proceeding to paint a contrast or take up an opposition stance, is vastly more powerful than creating a caricature or straw man, as counterintuitive as it may feel. An active seeking of the ideal balance between preserving and conserving and progress and evolution, and a recognition of the negative aspects of either extreme. That just as nature causes some things to die and others to spring to life, all ideas and concepts and philosophies and manners of thinking and being naturally experience similar cycles, and that our role might be best seen as keeping a keen and watchful eye out to recognize what is dying or deserves to die, and what might best spring to life in its place. The American experiment is a great example here. It began with a robust health and vigor, springing from healthy roots and creating a strong trunk. But as poison seeped in, as our language became twisted, our laws altered, our Constitution reinterpreted, and our quality of leadership degenerated, we might say its leaves began to yellow and brown. And yet, a springtime always follows on the heels of winter. On a similar note, a recognition that for everything there is a season, that all is changing, becoming, cyclical, that sadness and death are inescapable aspects of existence, just as much as happiness and life, and that while we can never hope to completely eliminate the former, we can restrain and constrain and minimize their expression in ideal circumstances. And yet spending such a wealth of our time and energy running from them pretending we might outrun them, is an exercise in futility, and often only serves to make us softer and thus far more sensitive to their effects. A recognition of the intrinsic value of long, hard winters, that their very existence is how and why we're able to so enjoy the radiant sun and its warmth. I hope to share more such cultural seed ideas later, but I wanted to end, for now, with what I consider the most important of all. In a recent video, I spoke to the importance of language and etymology as a means of following varied threads back to their sources in search of truth and clarity. There are few pursuits more informative or intriguing than tracing the development of language and of our most important and widely used words, their roots, suffixes, prefixes, and attempting to understand this development process. I spoke of the root word man, but not in any depth. Nearly all traditions of the origination of mankind, whether it be Sumerian, that of Norse legends and myths, those of the biblical tradition, or those of the ancient Iranians or Indians, speak of God creating man and woman in his image. In the oldest Indian works, penned by that ancient Aryan element destined to spread so far and wide, Manu was the first or archetypal man, and in Sanskrit, the term for human literally means of Manu, or children of Manu, according to surviving ancient manuscripts. Many now believe this has a deeper etymological connection to the earliest kings and rulers of those most important regions, where, quote, civilization seemed to spring up, in some ways almost fully formed, seemingly out of nowhere. The Greeks and Crete had Minos as their progenitor king. The Egyptians had Menes as their first. Tacitus speaks of the ancient Germans and their progenitor figure, Manus. In Latin, manus means hand, and a well-known expression, manus Dei, means hand of God, or more often, specifically the right hand of God. In all of the religious and mythical traditions mentioned above, which I strongly believe are intimately connected to one another and outgrowths of a single root, mankind is created for a reason, with divine purpose. As the only creation blessed with consciousness, we're told to go forth and multiply, to manifest right order in the world, to understand and help create the beautiful, to further manifest the universe. I believe we're tasked to be the conscious managers of his creation, to be good shepherds. Insofar as we fail to recognize this mandate, darkness and chaos is the inevitable result. People become, like rats on a sinking ship, confused, atomized, and disunited, selfish, self-serving, driven by blind demons in service to whims and desires for instant gratification. We completely lose sight of anything and everything higher. We see what type of human being takes power in these conditions. We're all witnessing it in every sphere and on every front as we speak. This should make it clear to any thinking person that this mandate isn't optional. If we refuse to recognize our inner nature and stand tall, if we refuse to fight this fight, if order isn't allowed to prevail over chaos, and the natural over the unnatural, every aspect or facet of existence and material being will suffer for it. But again, the only way this dark future comes to pass is if we refuse to fight. All of the earliest spiritual texts, all myths and stories and legends, and in fact all of history itself stands as testament to this. It's only by being lulled to sleep into a comatose slumber that chaos prevails. It feels a bit like we've endured decades of being drugged, inducing a half-asleep state in between nodding off and being jolted awake. And the fork in the road now poses a question: to give in to this sleep paralysis, or to muster every ounce of strength and will to find the means to wrest control of the scepter and throne. recognizing, as our ancestors did, that these are intended to function in service of something vastly higher, and never in the service of charlatans, hucksters, upstarts, and profiteers. Such types formerly lurked and slinked around in the shadows, because those who came before us were a stronger, more aware breed of man, who knew not only how to restrain their type, but the absolute necessity of doing so. I believe our role is to rediscover this innate strength and cultivate this level of awareness once again, and find the means to fashion the bonds to constrain this ignoble, cruel, parasitic archetype. If we could catch so much as a glimpse of what the world might be like, free from the dominance of this darkness, not a one of us would rest until the deed was done. The contrast would be as night to day. To summarize, recognizing and rejecting poison is a necessary first step, but in itself, it's not enough. So much of what was healthiest in our traditional manners of thinking and being now lies in tatters all around us. Millennia of inherited wisdom, purposefully torn to pieces, is under threat of disappearing forever. Until we're able to rediscover and communicate the most powerful and unifying elements of our collective culture, to simplify and clarify its core conceptions, and clearly paint an attractive contrast with the modern sickness, we'll be lacking a sturdy foundation on which to build. And with our current house collapsing all around us, we'll need to become builders again very soon. I encourage all listening to consciously work to envision and manifest this culture, one that might allow our generation to act as the springtime, serving to help usher in a beautiful and lasting summer. Remember who you are, and let's all find our roles.